and welcome to the monthly Beyond Zero Emissions discussion group. I've been told to say that in the event of an emergency, the exits are there, and you would exit onto Swanson Street, Elgin Street, sorry, in case you hadn't figured that out. Firstly, we'd like to acknowledge that we're meeting on the land of the Kulin Nations and pay our respects to their elders, past and present. We'd also like to thank Multi-Mindshausen and the team from the Australian-German Climate and Energy College at the University of Melbourne for this great venue. For anyone that hasn't been to one of our discussion groups before, BZE is a volunteer-led climate solutions think tank and research organisation. Our goal is to transform Australia from a 19th century fossil fuel-based economy into a 21st century renewable powered clean tech economy. Our projects include Zero Carbon Australia research, Repower Australia talks, Zero Carbon communities, media work, education programs, and much more. We're always looking for more volunteers, so come and talk to us afterwards if you'd like to get involved. This discussion group is a forum for climate change solutions with presentations by experts in their field and is held on the first Monday of every month, usually. Tonight, we're delighted to welcome Ellen Sandell and Rachel Deans to speak about climate action. Where is our effort, time and money most effective? Ellen needs no introduction. She's the Green State MP for Melbourne and is passionate about creating Australia's renewable energy economy. Rachel Deans from Market Forces is a campaigner with expertise in working with and empowering shareholders. Market Forces exposes the institutions that are financing environmentally destructive projects and help Australians hold these institutions accountable. Would you please welcome Ellen and Rachel?
Thank you. All right. Okay. Can people hear me okay down the back? Yeah, awesome. All right, well, thank you so much for having me. I'd also like to acknowledge that I'm on the lands of the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation and also pay my respects to elders past and present and emerging. Thank you so much for having me here today. My name's Rachel. As you introduced me, I work at Market Forces with shareholders to pressure companies. So I'm going to give a small presentation today and then there's heaps of time for questions at the end. So I'm going to just give a brief introduction into the history of Market Forces, why it exists, just run through the different aspects of our work if you're interested, and then go more specifically into shareholder action and something that we're doing a lot at the moment that's been quite powerful, which is shareholder resolutions. And I'll just walk you through why shareholder resolutions are so powerful, and then there'll be time at the end for questions. So Market Forces is 5 years old. Our director, Julian, set it up because he worked for Greenpeace for 6 years, and during his time there he saw that one of the most effective ways of creating change was to target finance. So if you target the finance that is going to build a coal mine or a fossil fuel project, you essentially don't get that mine built. And a good example of how that's worked here recently in Australia is the amazing campaign that's been run by many, many people against the Adani Carmichael mine. They essentially cannot get funding at the moment, and so it's very, very hard for them to actually become a mine. So Market Forces has quite a few different areas of campaign work if you're interested. We do a lot of work on banks, insurance, superannuation. There's also now quite a lot of international research. So we have a team that are supporting people in Vietnam, Indonesia and Singapore. And then we're also part of the Stop Adani campaign. And then there's shareholder action, which is what I'm doing. So last year we lodged quite a few different resolutions and they had quite a powerful effect in changing companies, but also highlighting the lack of engagement that superannuation companies were actually doing. So I'll talk a little bit about how we did this. We did this by lodging resolutions. So in Australian law, if 100 shareholders sign onto a resolution, in this case it was about climate change and climate disclosure, but you can have human rights resolutions, all different types of resolutions, but we wrote resolutions that were specifically about disclosing and addressing climate risk. So if you get 100 shareholders to sign on to that resolution, it means that the entire company has to vote on that resolution. Every single shareholder gets a message saying you need to vote on this resolution, and then there's an entire section at the annual general meeting, which every publicly listed company has an annual general meeting. There's an entire section dedicated to that particular resolution. So they're pretty powerful. Companies hate them, and they're a really, really great way of engaging. So our resolutions were based on the TCFD, the Task Force for Climate-Related Financial Disclosures. So that was an international task force set up to try and disclose and address climate risk so that the risks are available for investors. And it's pretty mainstream thing now, the TCFD. Even companies like BHP have signed up to it. A lot of the banks have signed up to it. But there are a lot of Australian companies that are resisting signing up to it, because as soon as you start talking about your emissions and how you're going to control it, then you have to start actually trying to control your emissions. So last year we lodged resolutions with Origin Energy, Oil Search, Commonwealth Bank. We didn't lodge one with Woodside. We were going to lodge one with Woodside, and then the CEO and board of Woodside came into our office and said, if you don't lodge this resolution, we will do X, Y, and Z. We will disclose climate risk. So that's another powerful thing about the resolution, is it's not just powerful in and of itself, it's a really great bargaining chip. And South32, which is a spin-off company of BHP, also kind of negotiated and said, okay, well, if you don't lodge this resolution, we'll do this. So in and of itself, just the threat of resolution is powerful, but the resolution itself is also quite powerful. So we also lodged a resolution last year with Santos, and I will just play you a quick video on what the chairman said when we asked about it at the AGM. So just a little bit of context. One of the powerful things about resolutions is if you get institutional investors to vote in favour of them. So Australian Super, for example, owns a really, really large chunk of money in a lot of the top 50 ASX companies. So Santos is a really big oil and gas company, and Australian Super and a lot of your other super funds own a large amount of money in that company. So if they vote in favour of the resolution is really likely to pass. However, they didn't vote in favour of the resolution because they said Santos is doing enough to tackle climate, and then this is what the chairman said.
One follow-up question, if I may. Santos claims to conduct scenario analysis. Are these done on a 2-degree economy pathway? And if so, when will they be disclosed to shareholders?
The pathway that we adopt is the 4-degree pathway, and it's the one that the World Energy Agency, I think it's, what's it called, Kevin? The
IEA.
The IEA business as usual. It's the comparison with the IEA business as usual forecast on carbon emissions. And
okay.
As you know, the 2-degree scenario which you're referring to there's been no nationally determined commitments to it. There's no NDCs to the 2-degree scenario, and even the 4-degree scenario is not funded. So, I think what we're doing is very, very sensible and consistent with good value.
So So as you can see, he obviously either has no idea what he's talking about or is planning for a doomsday world. And it's very, very embarrassing for the, institutional investors that said they really, really care about climate change, that they didn't vote in favour of Santos disclosing climate risk, and then the chairman came out and said that. Okay, so as I was saying, initially we tried to get superannuation funds to divest from fossil fuels, and this was just a really impossible task to do. So they said, no, we don't want to divest because we engage. We engage with these companies, we're doing great engagement. So we said, all right, we'll make engagement easy for you by lodging these resolutions, and we kind of proved that they weren't actually engaging, because even these resolutions that we're asking to disclose climate risk, which is one of the lowest bar things that even companies like BHP have done, they still weren't voting in favour of that. Or, some companies voted 50% for, 50% against. So they really didn't know what they were doing. This created quite a media stir, so we had quite a lot of media last year, and we've also just lodged 2 resolutions this year and have had a lot of media from that. It was front page of the Business in the Age a few weekends ago on a Saturday. These shareholder resolutions do get a lot of notice because they involve these institutional investors. So as I was saying, we have just lodged another 2 resolutions. One was with QBE. So QBE are an insurer that are losing lots and lots of money on climate change because of climate change disasters, yet they actually underwrite a lot of fossil fuel projects. So they originally had a relationship with Adani. I think because of public pressure, they haven't ruled it out, but I don't know if they'll do that, but they still underwrite a lot of fossil fuel projects. So we've done a resolution asking them to disclose and address climate risk. And Santos, again, we're aiming at, again, because of what happened last year and because of the fact that the chairman came out and said they operate in a manner, they follow the 4-degree pathway. We think we have a much better shot this year of actually getting them to disclose. So a win that's already come out is this is really shifting institutional investors. So local government super, which are a more progressive super fund, they own $10 billion. And they decided to actually sign on to our resolution with QBE. So they own $10 million in QBE. And the more money you own in a company, the more votes you get. So for example, with the resolution we lodged with Origin last year, CalPERS, a pension fund in the USA, they owned quite a lot. They owned 10% of Origin. They voted in favour of our resolution. Therefore, it forced Origin to actually do something about it because, 15% of their investors wanted to do something about it.
Presentation, but thank you so much for that. That's incredible work that you're doing.
You stand to the we don't have the lights shining on your face.
That's better for everyone? Okay, good. Hi everyone, my name's Ellen Sandell. I'm the State Member of Parliament for the seat of Melbourne with the Greens. So I was the very first Greens lower house member in Victorian Parliament. So my electorate stretches from Kensington, where I live, up to Carlton North, down to East Melbourne, and is bordered by the river on the southern edge. I never wanted to be a politician. Many of you would have heard me speak in forums like this before and heard me tell my personal story about how I never grew up wanting to be a politician. I don't think it's something that many people walk into their careers advisor in year 10 and say, hi, I'd like to be a politician. If they do, they're probably pretty strange. I always wanted to be a scientist growing up, and I grew up in the Mallee in Mildura, and I wanted to be a scientist because I cared very much about the natural world, and I wanted to understand it, and I wanted to protect it. I left Mildura to move to Melbourne to go to university, and a couple of things became very clear to me throughout my university years. The first was that we had just lived through the millennium drought, and I, coming from the river, became very scared that this was perhaps not just a drought but the new normal. And the second thing that became clear to me was that actually there were a lot of scientists telling us what the problems were and what the potential solutions available to us were, and actually the blockage was not in the science, it was in the political will to get things done. So I did get a degree in science. I did go on to become a scientist for a few years, but I also started to get very active in climate change activism and then eventually politics. I went on to become the CEO of the Australian Youth Climate Coalition before I eventually joined the Greens and ran for the seat of Melbourne in the Victorian Parliament. I also, just before I ran for Parliament, actually had a job as Premier John Brumby's climate advisor for a while in his team. And I had faith that perhaps our politicians and our premiers, they were saying the right things about climate change. Around the time when Kyoto was signed, it felt like there was a lot of movement towards politicians wanting to do the right thing on climate. But when I was actually working in the bureaucracy, I saw so many times politicians actually letting us down and saying one thing and doing another. I saw policies and reports be changed to favour the coal industry, to favour the logging industry, because there wasn't actually enough political power on the other side for politicians to do the right thing. And I realised that politicians, particularly those in Labor and Liberal, actually listened a lot more to votes than they did to the science or the facts. And it made me very despondent, as I'm sure it makes you, but it also made me realise that I had this incredible power, that actually if we could show politicians that there were votes in doing something on climate, and in fact if they didn't do something on climate they would lose seats and lose votes, then actually we could be incredibly, incredibly powerful. And so since I was elected in 2014, I've spent most of my time continuing to fight for climate action. And I wanted to give you just a couple of quick examples of where I feel like putting political pressure on the state government here through electing Greens and backing that up with a community campaign has actually got some really good, tangible climate actions. And then talk about, with the coming election, we've got a couple of elections coming up, what the opportunities are to get more action on climate change. So going into 2014, unfortunately, we had a Liberal Party here in Victoria who didn't even seem to think that climate change was happening. And we had a Labor Party who said that climate change was happening but refused to really commit to very much at all. We had a Labor Party that wouldn't even commit to a Victorian renewable energy target. And we saw this. We saw it that it was a bit scary and a little bit disappointing, but we saw it as an opportunity. And the Greens, we got together with some of the climate groups like Environment Victoria and Friends of the Earth, and we jointly decided to launch campaigns for a Victorian renewable energy target. Labor said, no, we're not doing it. So we just kept increasing the campaign, and it's simple things. It was community groups following Labor politicians around to forums like this and to press conferences and constantly talking about, will you have a Victorian renewable energy target, constantly asking them the question. And it was the Greens, we launched our policy, we did a whole bunch of media on it, we did everything that a political party in that situation would do, sent out leaflets about our policy, all of that. The Labor Party said no, they couldn't do it. They couldn't do it. And then the Greens got a seat in the lower house and we got shared balance of power in the upper house. And Labor said still, oh no, we can't do it because there's some problem with, it conflicts with the federal renewable energy target. We can't have a state-based renewable energy target, even though we used to have one. So we did a lot of policy research. We worked with researchers here at the University of Melbourne to show them actually legally how they could do it, and there was actually nothing legally blocking their way. We wrote media articles about it, opinion pieces, and all the while the community campaign, while I was doing that, the policy research and the politics and getting media on it, the community campaign was doing a great job going to all the press conferences, turning up at all the events, running forums in local, regional communities talking about renewable energy, and just building and building and building. And eventually the campaign just got so big, and the Energy Minister was being asked at every single place she went, when will they have a renewable energy target, that Labor came out and actually announced their renewable energy target. And we got word that this was happening, and we were worried. We got word that they would announce quite a low target, so about 25% by 2025 or something like that. And we thought, well, that's pretty much just business as usual. And so right at the last second, we increased the campaign, and eventually they came out with a target which was 40% by 2025, which back in 2014 we thought was just impossible. It wasn't going to happen. But because of a community campaign and the power of the Greens in Parliament, we actually then last year legislated for a Victorian renewable energy target, which is going to significantly increase the percentage of renewables in this state. A similar thing happened on the unconventional gas and fracking campaign that many of you might have been involved in. This started a little bit earlier, back in 2011, when Friends of the Earth and some local community groups formed Gasfield Free Victoria, put a lot of pressure on politicians, and the Liberal Party actually adopted a moratorium on fracking in the state. But in the lead up to 2014, there was about to be an election and the moratorium was about to expire. And so we had to get Labor and Liberal on the record to say where they would stand on fracking in this state. And there was an incredibly strong community campaign led by Friends of the Earth, led by local regional communities mostly. And they did things like all the tactics that you would have heard about, going around a town and doing a survey, a vote, saying, would you like fracking in your town or not? There were communities all across Victoria who did these votes overwhelmingly, 90, 95%, some places 98% of people responded to that survey and said no, they didn't want fracking in their community. We had actions like one of the farmers actually in Western Victoria, arranged his sheep to say ban gas, and did a beautiful little video of all his sheep forming the words, an aerial video. It was very great. We did this was in the lead up to 2014. In fact, Labor and the Liberals didn't, neither of them said whether they would have a moratorium on gas fracking or not, which was pretty disappointing, to be honest. But again, we just kept continuing the campaign. I did things like I brought a farmer down from New South Wales who'd worked on the campaign up there, along with Jeremy Buckingham, who you might have seen on YouTube. His claim to fame is lighting some gas on fire in a river in Queensland. You might have seen that video. Incredible gas bubbling out of the river, and you could actually light it on fire. Brought them down and did a tour across regional Victoria where we were talking to local communities about the impacts of gas, particularly in Western Victoria and Gippsland, where the two areas where fracking was most likely. And this campaign just built up such a head of steam. Again, community campaigning combined with having Greens in Parliament. We were able to push for an inquiry in Parliament into fracking, helped to use our numbers in the upper house to actually get that inquiry through. That inquiry was a really important moment in the campaign because it actually split the Labor Party on the issue. There were 3 members of the Labor Party on that inquiry, and because we did a lot of work on that inquiry, one of them ended up saying, yes, we want fracking, and the other 2 said, no, we want a permanent ban. And so we were actually able to navigate some of those wedges in the Labor Party to try and put pressure on them. And eventually, the campaign just got so big and so public that the Labor Party came out and committed to a permanent ban on fracking in this state and a moratorium on other types of conventional gas onshore. So these are just two examples, and obviously they were long, big campaigns with lots of different tactics that contributed to them. But two very good examples where if you have an environmental or a climate issue, if you have community groups, local campaigners who are outside of politics running a campaign, and you combine that with the tactics that we can use in the Parliament, things like pushing for inquiries, using our numbers in the upper house, things like using our platform in the media to talk about the climate issues, the lobbying efforts that we can do through Parliament, and the threat of losing seats to the Greens, these things combined actually gets Labor to change their position. The best example, I think, of this is the Northcote by-election last year. At the Northcote by-election, this is not an environmental issue, but you saw the Labor government and Daniel Andrews just try and out-green the Greens on almost every single issue in the lead-up to Northcote. They were so desperate to retain that seat that they announced pretty much our entire policy platform when it came to renters' rights. They were out there announcing our policies left, right and centre. And, you know, great. That's what we're there for. Yes, the Greens would like to be in government. Yes, we'd like to be in balance of power. But actually, we're there to change policy. The one thing, and we ended up actually winning that seat and electing the very first Aboriginal woman to Victorian Parliament, which was excellent. But our work isn't finished. We've been able to shift Labor some of the way on some climate issues. Remember, going into 2014, they had no policy on a renewable energy target, no policy on gas fracking, no policy on phasing out coal in Victoria. We've been able to shift some of that over the last 3 years, but the best time to actually affect change is going into elections when they're afraid of losing seats. And we actually have an incredible opportunity going into the November state election. The Greens have 3 seats in the lower house. The government only has a 1-seat majority. We're knocking on the door of 2 other lower house seats, Brunswick and Richmond. We currently hold Prahran, Melbourne and Northcote. We're within a whisker of winning Brunswick and Richmond. You can do the numbers yourself. They have a 1-seat majority. If everything else stays the same and we win 2 seats, that gives us balance of power in the lower house. That means that the Labor government won't be able to form government unless they actually work with the Greens. And of course, we will ask for something in return. We will ask for stronger action on climate change. We will demand an end to logging of our native forests. We will demand an end to the rollout of the ridiculous gas program that the government currently has going, where they're actually there's only a temporary moratorium on onshore gas. They're drilling for gas offshore. They're rolling out gas to new suburbs when we know that this is a climate and also economic disaster for those communities. We'll release our list closer to the election, but these are the kinds of things that are at the core of the Greens and our values, and that's the kinds of things that we'll be saying to the Labor Party if we're in balance of power. Well, if you want to form government, these are the things you have to act on. So I didn't go into politics to be a politician. It wasn't always my dream, but I did it because I just feel we have an incredible opportunity to affect change on the things that matter to us. And as you all know, we are running out of time. We've been running out of time for a long time when it comes to climate change, and the pace of action has to be so rapid. We need to do everything in our power to get action on climate change. Everyone needs to do the thing that they can, and I think we just have an incredible opportunity this November for the Greens to get balance of power and demand stronger action. We know that the Labor Party, if they do win, still backing coal. We have no plan to phase out brown coal in Victoria. In fact, they're doing seismic testing off the coast right now to look for ways to do carbon capture and storage when it's not a commercial or proven technology anywhere, and I'm afraid they're just doing it to be able to say we can keep burning coal because we can just store the coal emissions off the coast. As I mentioned, we're still rolling out gas. We still actually have no megawatt target for the renewable energy target. We have a percentage, but a percentage of what? We actually need to pin the government down to a target. And logging is one that's just incredibly close to my heart because it just makes no sense that we continue to log our high conservation value and most carbon dense forests in the world right here in Victoria. So happy to answer any questions about how you can get involved, but winning 5 seats is our aim. Getting balance of power is our aim. And winning 5 seats is more than we've ever tried to win before, so it's actually a very big challenge for us. It's not a done deal by any stretch of the imagination. We need boots on the ground, we need people knocking on doors, we need people making phone calls, we need people to donate so we can actually get letters in people's letterboxes. All of this is incredibly important, and I just think we're really fortunate here in Victoria to have this opportunity at this moment in time. Thank you.
Would you guys like to take questions?
Yeah.
Can I ask one, Ellen?
Yeah.
The state opposition is threatening to dismantle the renewable energy target if they get in November. Are they realistically have a chance of doing that?
I'd say no, for a couple of reasons. One is they would have to get legislation through Parliament, so that was why we pushed quite hard that the target had to actually be legislated, not just a commitment from the government. It actually had to be legislated, because then they have to use Parliament to repeal it, and I don't see how the opposition, even if they win government, will win enough seats in the upper house to do that. So look, they may try, they may get the numbers, I hope not. On gas, I'm a lot more optimistic because the community campaigns around VRET and gas were so big that the opposition were also a target, and they know it would be incredibly, incredibly unpopular to open up the state to fracking, although they are trying to get rid of a moratorium on conventional onshore gas. So they are trying to open up the state to conventional drilling, which will then open doors to fracking. So the state opposition is a complete joke when it comes to climate and environment policy. And that's not me saying this is just a partisan thing. In some places, Conservatives have decent climate change policies. Unfortunately, Victoria is not one of those places. They're completely backwards when it comes to climate. And if they get into government, we will have a huge task on our hands as a community to show them that it would be incredibly unpopular to roll back VRET and gas, but fingers crossed. Yes.
Beyond Zero has done a lot of work about how Australia can become a renewable energy superpower. Perhaps naively, I think that sort of argument has the potential to capture the attention of Conservative politicians. You had the opportunity to talk to a lot of Conservative politicians, I imagine. Well, does that capture their interest at all?
I think it does to some of the more sensible and more moderate ones, but we have a larger problem in Victoria where the Liberal Party, and it's happening federally as well, but it doesn't happen everywhere, but it is happening in Victoria and federally, where the Liberal Party is actually just being co-opted by the hard right. You've seen that with people like Mary Wooldridge, who was a relative moderate when it comes to Liberal Party. She had the seat of Kew. They had a pre-selection. She was rolled by this young attack dog in Tim Smith, who was very right-wing, very conservative. And there's just more and more of these, unfortunately, younger, most often men, coming through the Liberal Party. And I don't know why that's happened here in Victoria. We used to be kind of the moderate heartland, what do they call us, like the blue ribbon, kind of jewel in the crown of the Liberal Party. But unfortunately, we're just being taken over more and more by this hard right. And they have an almost ideological opposition to anything to do with climate action or the environment, which is stupid because environmentalism is fundamentally a conservative ideal. I think that you're right in that we can frame it in different ways. It makes them more amenable to it, and the Greens Renew Australia policy very much goes down that route as well, of saying let's not just deal with climate change, let's be a superpower, let's actually have more renewable energy than we need and actually attract advanced manufacturing here and actually export our energy to the world through manufacturing. I think that's an incredibly exciting idea. Unfortunately, at the moment, it doesn't seem to be catching with some of the Liberals, and I don't really know why. It's disappointing.
Sorry, slightly off topic, but what the Greens' policy on their recyclables at the moment, which is a huge problem facing us immediately right now because
Yes.
of China's not taking the rubbish in.
Absolutely, it's a huge crisis, and we put out a whole bunch of media statements that you can read as soon as the crisis happened, a few weeks ago, the most recent crisis. We need to develop a recycling industry here. So essentially what happened is that we offshored all our recycling industry, and then the doors were closed to China, and now everyone's going, oh no, we should have had a recycling industry here in Victoria. And now what councils are having to stockpile or send things to landfill, and I think it's something that has captured people so intensely. I have friends who don't ever really talk to me about environmental issues, saying, what do I do now? Am I allowed to recycle? Can I put things in the bin? People just feel it because it's part of their everyday life. So have a chat if you want to hear more to Nina Springle. She's our spokesperson for waste. I'm not the spokesperson for waste, so she knows a bit about the detail, but I know she put out a whole bunch of media statements on that day talking about the need for a recycling industry here. The gentleman at the back.
Yeah, I believe last Friday, Big Forest was found to be in breach of their charter in regards to the Great Glide, particularly in the Alpine area of the Aboriginal. Are you guys think we could use this as a lever to start on the Alpine National Park again?
Absolutely. So Samantha Dunn, who some of you may know is our forest spokesperson, she's been doing incredible work in the upper house on forests. There is not a week that goes by where she isn't directly questioning the Minister in Parliament on all these technical issues that I don't think anyone else has their head across apart from her. So she's been doing a great job. And she's got the portfolio because she's got a long history in it, and also she's in the upper house where the Minister is, so she can question them directly, whereas I'm in the other house with the Climate Minister. So absolutely, this is a point that she'll be raising. We're back in Parliament tomorrow. I'm sure she'll have a litany of questions for the Minister. The campaign for the Great Forest National Park and to end logging was going really, really well. In Northcote, it was such a big issue that pretty much journalists only asked about the Great Forest National Park at most press conferences that I went to. It was something that, it was really great because every article was like, this is a campaign about the Great Forest National Park. You know, the Greens are running on Great Forest National Park. This will be the test for Labor. And that having that by-election made it such a big issue, but unfortunately we just haven't seen Labor shift on it. We thought we almost had them over the line, and then Daniel Andrews came out and unfortunately bowed to the CFMEU again, which is really disappointing because there's elements of that union that are really on side with climate action. And so it's incredibly disappointing, but we'll be using it as much as we can. But we need a community campaign as well. This is part of my message, is that the community campaign needs to go hand in hand with what we can do in Parliament.
We've got an extremely small window left to save Snob Street. So there's Snob Street Falls, which is a national treasure. There's 4 coops around that. It'll take maybe 50 or 60 years before Snob Street Falls will look like Snob Street Falls again if they're allowed to go ahead. Yeah,
it's outrageous. And they're in breach of their own rules half the time, big forests. We have been able to get the Minister to intervene on a couple of occasions where it's been found, the community has found, maybe potentially you're a part of this, the community's found breaches, and then we've been able to directly raise them that day in Parliament, and we've actually got actions from the Minister to stop them, and sometimes the community's done that directly, and it's been incredible to watch. But we can't just keep going with this piecemeal and having community members have to go out there and find breaches. They should be sticking to the bloody rules and actually shouldn't be logging in the first place. So I want to do everything absolutely that I can on this. If you have further ideas about what we can do, absolutely open to them.
Yeah. Can I go back to the previous question about advanced manufacturing? Maybe both of you can.
So I'm just shareholder stuff. Like,
but you know about business. My question really is about business. With the Liberal Party moving to the far right, if there's ideas for advanced manufacturing that can come through renewables, why isn't business interested in that, therefore influencing the Liberal Party? Can you comment on that?
Because the incentives are set up all wrong. So, for example, we still have taxpayer subsidies to the fossil fuel industry. So it's not a level playing field to start with. The renewables industry, if they were just on a level playing field with coal, they'd be winning already, because renewables is cheaper than coal in a lot of cases now. The world is moving in that direction. But unfortunately here in Australia, we prop up the fossil fuel industry, and we prop up the manufacturing industry. It's this thing about discounting the future. There's not a vested interest in future jobs or future industries. It's just the few businesses who have the vision, who can see it would be good for them to go into that area. But actually there's a lot more companies that are given taxpayer dollars with vested interest to trying to keep things how they are. And we need some more business visionaries to come out and say, actually, I can see a business opportunity over here in something clean. But you might have some ideas on that.
Well, I'd say as well that, the Minerals Council of Australia, for example, is a huge lobby group that is very, very powerful and lobbies for, against renewables. So we're up against that as well. And then when you look in the business world, quite a lot of board members and CEOs don't even believe in climate change. So, there's that element as well.
How depressing, thank you.
I don't mean to depress you. We're supposed to come here and fill you with inspiration about how we can...
That little bit of reality.
Well, luckily ACCR has just lodged another resolution. So there was a resolution last year that they lodged, again, 100 shareholders signed on, asking BHP to split their membership with the Minerals Council. You may have seen that in the newspaper. They've just done the same thing with Rio Tinto. If BHP and Rio Tinto, they give a third, they're the biggest funders of the Minerals Council. If they get out of the Minerals Council is severely impaired, because so that kind of stuff is really, really powerful as well. Yeah.
Well, that's good.
Yeah.
I would have thought insurance companies would have the best understanding of the future risks of climate change.
Yeah.
And yet you seem to be saying QBE is reluctant or...
Yes.
I can't understand how it's going to happen.
That's a very, very good question. The insurance companies in Europe are really on side with climate. The QBE is one of the most, I would say, the least on side here in Australia. It's a good question. I don't know either. I guess that's why, LG Super, big superannuation fund is signing on to our resolution, because it makes so much sense for the insurance industry, an industry that is going to be that is already seeing the effects of climate change on their business monetarily, to actually, start implementing policies to address climate risk.
Can I comment on that?
Yeah.
The Greens should be establishing superb relationships with the whole insurance industry, because it's an advantage to the insurance people. But their general philosophy is add-on. They don't try and solve the problems of resulting from climate change and energy misuse, thereby restraining costs and restraining disasters, if you like, and costs from them. They simply have the principle of adding on the amount to the amount that their clients have to pay for the insurance, rather than doing it the other end. That is their philosophy. But we should establish enormously strong relationships and arguments with the insurance industry. It should be top priority, and it hasn't been. I don't know why.
Do you feel like I answered your question?
Yes, I can.
Yeah. Okay. Great.
I would have thought overall the climate change was good for insurance companies. That there's more insurance needed. To them it's probably a business opportunity. Why should they try and get rid of it?
But they're paying out more.
Yeah.
But therefore they can put premiums up, and if they do that right, it makes more money. It's great.
QBE is. QBE have said this year they've lost money because of the amount of natural disasters. So actually it is problematic for them, and customers get angry if they put up premiums too much as well. So they've got that balance as well in terms of, okay, they put up their premiums to make money for shareholders, but then, customers get annoyed. And currently shareholders are very annoyed because they've lots of money. Yeah.
And they can't do the adequate modelling.
Exactly.
Yeah. Big floods happened in Queensland a few years ago. I mean, that was massive payouts, enormous, way outside their business.
Yeah, it's all about risk, and they can't foresee risk anymore because the world's gone crazy with its climate events.
Yeah, could we change our language a bit? So you talk about natural disasters. Could we say they're man-made, they're human-made disasters?
That's a good point.
Yes, because I think people like to dismiss what we're seeing in the climate as just natural.
Yeah.
Okay, and it depends what you mean by nature, but they're able to dismiss that or put a wall around climate change.
Yeah.
Mentally and emotionally, and I think that if this change, we can change the language, then perhaps they'll take much more notice that this is climate change and how important that is. So there's superannuation that they have trust that the superannuation funds with is going to disappear.
Yeah. Absolutely. That's a really great point. Yes, Jeff.
I was wondering if you have any rankings of super funds as to the ones that are most environmentally conscious, etc. I'm particularly interested in big super.
Yeah, sure. So we actually have an entire website dedicated to that. It's called Super Switch. So it's superswitch.org.au, I think, but if you put down your name, I can send it to you. And that shows all the different superannuation, every single one, and which companies each of those are invested in, and the companies that aren't invested in any, fossil fuel companies at all. Yeah. No worries. Sorry? I think so. It is. Oh, great. Thank you. Yeah, superswitch.org.au. Thanks so much.
Any other questions? I'll leave some business cards. Where's the best place to leave them? Up here?
Oh, we just had another question here.
Oh, sorry.
I have a small question. I'm just wondering if Green Party has any plan for other sectors than the electric sector, because many people talk about climate change, which is true. I think it's a crisis right now. It's not an issue anymore. But what about air quality or other sectors like transportation? Do we have any plan to replace gasoline cars with other alternatives? Or we have many other kind of air quality and climate issues than only electric sector. I know it's easier because there are point sources, they are easier to control, but what about other policies for other sectors?
You're absolutely right. So in Victoria, we focus a lot on energy because it is the biggest contributor to our emissions, particularly because we get so much of our energy from brown coal, which is fairly unique in even the country, let alone the world. But of course, we look at all those other sectors as well. So just last year, I moved for an inquiry into electric vehicles in the Parliament because, again, the government was dragging its heels. They refused to even look into it. So we used our numbers and we actively moved for an inquiry into electric vehicles to look at how we could support the rollout of electric vehicles and how we could do that in an environmentally and climate safe way. So that should report in the next, 2 months. Sometime this year that inquiry should report and we'll have a response to that. But that was just a way to have a platform to actually talk about electric vehicles. As part of that, we made sure the inquiry was going to look into manufacturing as well, and particularly things like electric buses, which some of them were being made here in Victoria. Canberra actually had a trial to build 3 electric buses here in Victoria to trial them on ACT roads, but the Victorian government won't put out tenders for electric buses, so we'd like to see that happen here. Transport, of course, is a huge issue here in Victoria. It's something that the Greens have always talked about. Part of our kind of top 3 or 4 issues is particularly public transport and active transport. So Sam Hibbins is our transport spokesperson, and he's putting together a plan of what are the things we need to do to improve the Victorian and particularly the Melbourne public transport network, because we know that it's pretty run down, and ever since it was sold off, it's probably, we're getting a lot worse service than if it was kept in public hands. So there's lots that Greens have policies on all of these areas. They're all on our website, and leading into the election, it gives us an opportunity to relaunch them, re-announce them, put a little bit more focus on them, and we'll be doing that over the next few months. Oh, and when it comes to air quality, that's a really good question as well. We saw last year the state governments all got together with the federal government to set an air quality standard for particulates in the atmosphere. Victoria went in with a decent policy. New South Wales went in with a shocking policy. And unfortunately, Victoria rolled over and let New South Wales have their way. So we ended up coming out with a standard for air quality particulates that's really less than ideal. Also, you may have seen Doctors for the Environment come out with a report last week about the level of mercury and sulphur that's being emitted from coal power stations. They're saying there may be a link. There has been a link in other countries between sulphur emissions and low birth weights. And we're seeing there's actually low birth weight on average in the Latrobe Valley. And so there's some studies being done now into whether sulphur emissions are the cause or a factor in low birth weights in the Latrobe Valley. If that's a link, that's huge. That is incredible. And the level of mercury coming out of those coal plants is just outrageous as well. So we've been doing a little bit of work to try and shine a light on that, but for some reason the Herald Sun's not that interested in what I have to say on coal, so we don't always get as much attention as we'd like. So I'll leave some business cards up here. If people have any questions, feel free to email me because I have to head off. And if you do want to get involved in the lead up to November, let me know. There's so much that you can do, and I'm sure you have a petition or something?
Oh yeah, I've just got some stuff outside. I've got some business cards for Michael Forces and for me, and a sign up if you're interested. And I'll be at the pub. So thanks for coming.
Thank Ellen. And we'd like to present you both with BZD t-shirts. There's one large one and one very tiny one there. And a copy of Energy Freedom Home, which is a manual on how to make your home completely sustainable and have zero energy bills.
Thank you so much.
That's all right. Thank you both very much.
Thank you.
Okay, so we'd like to continue the discussion at the pub. So if you go down the ramp outside the building, and the pub is on your right just before the next set of lights. You can catch up with discussion group recordings at the BZD website. The next BZD discussion group is on Monday the 9th of April. It will be at the Elizabeth Murdoch Theatre in Melbourne Uni. The speaker will be Simon Corbell, who's the Victorian Government's renewable energy advocate. He was very responsible for some renewable energy work in Canberra. So he's a very interesting bloke to listen to. Other BZD events on the 7th of March, Wednesday this week. BZD webinar on zero carbon communities, information on the website about that. And if you're interested, at 2 p.m. on the same day, that's, Wednesday the 14th of March, that's next week, there's an open house, BZD open house at Ross House, where BZD is now headquartered. And tomorrow night, at 6:30, join Friends of the Earth on Climate Collective and find out how you can get involved. And you'll have to look up Friends of the Earth's website. I don't have the details about the location of that. I'd just like to say that BZD is, all BZD's work is supported by donations from individuals. Nothing comes from politics or business. We can remain independent that way, but we're always short of funds. So if you'd like to donate to BZD on a monthly basis or with one-off donation, whatever, see John outside the table. And we'll see you all next month.